You know that feeling when a tiny little worry starts to spiral, and before you know it, it's this huge, overwhelming thing? Well, today, we're going to unpack a super powerful mental tool that's designed to stop that spiral dead in its tracks. It's all about grounding your fears in what's actually real.
So, does your brain's alarm bell sometimes ring a little too loud? Maybe a little too often? Yeah? If your mind is a pro at turning a tiny snowball of worry into a full-blown avalanche, you are in exactly the right place. Let's talk about how to get a handle on that alarm bell. All right, Section 1, when worry takes over. We've all been there, right? That moment when just a simple concern gets totally hijacked by your brain's, let's call it the worst-case scenario generator. It's that little voice that loves to imagine disaster. You know, psychologists have a name for this. It's called catastrophic thinking. It's basically when our minds just leap to the most extreme, negative conclusion they can possibly cook up.
And what's so wild about this is how our brains can just latch onto that one terrible outcome. I mean, it completely ignores all the evidence that points in the other direction. It's a classic cognitive distortion. But, and this is the important part, the good news is that it's a distortion we can actually correct. Okay, Section 2, a reality check. So that brings us to the solution. And it's a really simple but structured way to get back in the driver's seat and give those anxious thoughts a much-needed reality check. It's called the Probability Recheck Protocol. And look, this isn't about just trying to ignore your feelings or pretend they don't exist. Not at all. It's about becoming a detective for your own thoughts. It's a structured exercise that helps you take apart that irrational dread piece by piece and replace it with something much more realistic and balanced. All right, Section 3. The 4-step recheck. Okay, this is where the rubber really hits the road. We're going to walk through the 4 simple steps of this whole protocol. And to make it super clear, we'll use a classic example, that feeling of anxiety you might get at work.
So here's our game plan, and it's simple but really powerful. First, we define the worry. Second, we list the evidence. Third, we estimate the likelihood. And fourth, we create a balanced statement. So, first up, define the worry.
Okay, step 1. The very first thing you have to do is get super specific. You know, vague fears are slippery. They're like smoke. You can't grab onto them, and they feel huge and unbeatable. So by forcing yourself to write the worry down in just one clear sentence, you're pinning it to the wall so you can actually take a good, hard look at it.
So for our example, let's use this one. We're not just going to say, oh, I'm nervous about my presentation. No, we're targeting that core catastrophic thought. I'm going to completely ruin the big presentation at work. See how absolute that is? Completely ruin. That's the kind of specific, dramatic statement we need to put under the microscope.
All right, step 2 is where we list the evidence. We've got our target locked in, so it's time to put on that detective hat again. I want you to literally imagine 2 columns. On one side, you're going to list all the evidence for your worry being true, and on the other, all the evidence against it. The key here is to be objective. Be a fair judge.
And just look what happens when we actually do this. In the for column, what do we have? I'm nervous about public speaking. Okay, that's a feeling. One slide is a bit confusing. That's a tiny detail. But then you look at the against column, and whoa, I've practiced for 10 hours. My boss said the draft was strong. I've given successful talks before. It's like a little pile of feelings versus a mountain of facts. When you see it like that, the evidence against the fear is kind of overwhelming, isn't it?
Okay, that brings us to step 3, estimate the likelihood. Now, be honest. Before we did that evidence step, your anxious brain probably had the chance of total disaster at, 90%, 100%? It feels like a sure thing. But now, armed with all that evidence we just listed, we can make a much more rational, logical estimate.
Let's say your worry's initial gut feeling estimate was 90%. I mean, that's the voice of anxiety talking, right? That 90% feels like a fact. It feels like an absolute certainty. That number is pure emotion, just running wild with no logic to keep it in check.
But now, let's recheck it with reality. After looking at our evidence, the 10 hours of practice, the good feedback, what's the real likelihood of completely ruining it? Maybe it's more like 15%. And notice, we're not saying it's 0. Things can always go a little sideways. But 15% is a whole different universe from the 90% certainty our anxiety was screaming at us just a minute ago.
And that brings us to the final step. Step 4, write a balanced statement. And honestly, this might be the most important part of the whole process. You've done all the logical work, and now it's time to create a new, truthful story to tell yourself.
This is the statement that's going to replace that old, fearful one.
So a more realistic take could be something like this. While I'm nervous, I am well prepared for the presentation, and it is very likely to go well, even if it's not perfect. This is so powerful. See what it does? It doesn't deny the nervousness. It says, yep, I feel nervous, but then it immediately frames that feeling with the truth. I am well prepared, and it's very likely to go well. This is a statement built on facts, not on fear.
So let's wrap this up. Section 4, from fear to fact. Just take a second and look at the transformation that just happened here. We took this absolutely terrifying thought, and step by step, we took it apart and replaced it with a calm, rational perspective. It's pretty amazing.
This really is the whole journey in a nutshell. We started with the initial worry, I will ruin the presentation, and we ended with a balanced take. I am well prepared, and it is likely to go well. We took an explosive, fear-based idea and, using pure logic, turned it into a calm, evidence-based one. Again, it's not about getting rid of worry entirely, it's about getting it down to its proper size.
So, just to recap, what's the goal here? It's not a magic wand, it's about right-sizing your worry. It's about learning to challenge that catastrophic thinking. The whole point is to reduce the emotional gut punch that anxiety delivers, and most importantly, to ground yourself in reality, in what's actually probable, not just what's scary and technically possible.
Because really, the power of this tool isn't just knowing about it, right? It's actually using it. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What worry in your life will you recheck first?